So if we're used to deadlines and dealing with them, then why do we all know that feeling in your gut when a deadline approaches? Some of you maybe feel this right now while your teams are back at headquarters, right? Well, simply estimating is tough, right? And if you want to get precise about it, estimating with accuracy is pretty tough, so not just throwing estimates out there, but throwing out accurate ones. And there's some reasons for that. So there's these planning problems, right? Unknowns. A lot of the time in the planning phase, the details about what we need to do aren't available to us up front. Maybe we do know what to do, but it's a task we've never done before, so it's hard to say how long that'll take. Maybe it's something that we've done, but there's always something that's going to come up. There's something that's going to happen in the future that we're not conscious of in the present moment. So there's a bunch of unknowns. There's dependencies as well. So the work you're doing, it might be dependent on another team, holding up their end of the bargain. That's a scary thought, huh? Especially if that schedule that they're on isn't available to you. It's sort of like a black box. You don't know what their priorities are. It could be tough to say when it is you're going to be delivering your piece of the puzzle. And then there's availabilities, right? So folks on your team, they take vacations. People spend time at summits and talks, right? And then also the teams that you're dependent on, they have their own availabilities as well. So managing that can be a challenge. And then the reporting needs, right? So the projects that you're working on or the products that you're building, those pesky stakeholders, they always want to know, where's it at? What are the risks? How are we tracking? And, you could be gathering data from all these different teams, status updates and whatnot, and by the time you received all of that and put together a report, is it even accurate anymore? Who knows? So at Thrillist, we try to deal with these issues using a combination of JIRA software with Kanban methodologies and JIRA portfolio. So Kanban is what we use to manage our day-to-day activities and operations, so basically our day-to-day work. And then portfolio can aggregate all of that work and forecast our delivery dates and our estimated launch dates, which is great. So I'm Mike. I'm the product management lead at Thrillist. And for those who don't know, Thrillist is a digital media publisher, and our mission is to help everyone live fun lives through the content that we write. But the role of the product team is to make sure that we're delivering the best experience to our readers, regardless of what platform they choose to consume our content on. And in the media industry, there are just platforms popping up left and right, Google AMP, Facebook Instant. There's all these different emerging opportunities like chatbots. And so it's really important for us to be nimble and flexible and pivot our strategy on a dime. And so that's why we use Kanban. It's very flexible. And then we also need to keep a grip on the big picture, right? So we need to be able to go to our executive management team, let them know what we're working on, what our goals are, our strategies, and also let them know when new features will be rolling out. So this talk is going to be a deep dive into our world of planning and execution of our product roadmap. And we're going to put our entire Atlassian setup on display. And I hope that this talk sort of facilitates a conversation amongst all of us, really. Atlassian products can be used in so many different ways. It'd be great to learn from each other on how you use it at your company. And then I also want to highlight the tool JIRA Portfolio, which is a relatively young tool. And we've seen a lot of success with it. And I hope that this talk inspires you to give this tool a shot if you haven't already. And build on the community that's really gathered around this tool and foster more adoption. So first off is Kanban, and if you're not familiar with Kanban, then I hope what just happened up there on the board is a little bit of a visual indicator on how it works. So let's dive right in. So what is Kanban? Kanban is an agile methodology, but it's pretty mature. So Toyota adopted it in the 1940s and 50s to manufacture cars. Basically, they took a look at the way American supermarkets stock their shelves. They were able to keep the shelves stocked without hoarding a massive amount of inventory. And while that sounds pretty basic this year, in 2016, back then, it was a pretty impressive feat, right? So the concept is pretty simple. A customer walks into the grocery store, pulls a product off the shelf. The empty space in that shelf is a visual communicator to the supplier that we need to replenish that product on the shelf. So if you take a look at Wikipedia, or if you type in Kanban translation online, you'll get all different sorts of interpretations of its translation. Some say it means signal, some say it means visual, some say it means card. But at the end of the day, Kanban is all about pulling work into a process and then visualizing its life cycle throughout the workflow. And why do we like Kanban? Well, we like it for a couple of reasons, one of them being that it's flexible. So our developers, we're not spending time locking down a scope for a biweekly sprint or anything like that, and we're not getting bent out of shape when things come in or priority shift. It's basically an expected thing. Instead, each product manager on each team owns the responsibility of continuously prioritizing the backlog for the team. After completing a task, a developer will just go to the top of the backlog, pull something into progress, and start working on it. And they can rest assured knowing that what they're working on is the most important thing to the business because it's at the top of the backlog. So Kanban's fast as well. So we're not waiting around for the sprint to end before we release something. We're releasing stuff every day. So there's probably a deploy going on right now back in New York at Thrillist. Once a task makes its way through the process, it's ready to go. So this enables us to get code out into the wild very, very quickly. And we're also able to maintain this high speed with quality because we're baking in done rules, and we're enforcing those done rules throughout the process. Things like code must be code reviewed. We got to get approval from our product quality team. And while those might sound like hindrances to speed, you'll see that Kanban's work in progress limits actually facilitate quality with speed at the same time. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. And lastly, Kanban's just very simple. So on a Kanban team, you have the board, the backlog, and that's really it. So there's no mandatory ceremonies going on. Our folks are focused on getting stuff done. And we have big lunches, and we'll take a look at how things are going after big product launches and stuff like that, talk about what we could have done better. But those retrospectives and those improvement talks aren't limited to big product launches. They happen all the time. So here's just an example of what a typical board looks like. This is our front-end developer board. And what you'll see here is tasks in an icebox, in progress, and code review. These are all of our statuses, and we're trying to keep our workflow pretty simple. We've made it work for us. Every team that has a board is their home. It's their one source of truth of what they're working on. And other teams have similar boards as well, and those boards are their homes. And this board gets Chromecasted right above the team's heads, so everybody could see what they're working on, and they could know as well. And you'll also notice about the work in progress limits at the top of those columns that make sure that we're focusing and not overloading any one step. And there might be people here who tell their developers, after you're done with that thing, make sure you go into JIRA and update that ticket and move it into the right status. Or you might have a product manager at stand-up every morning, get everybody's status, and then move stuff on the board that way. And for us, we like to keep everything in sync with reality as best we can, and basically try to overcome the problems of resistance to moving tickets, forgetfulness, laziness, and we do that by automation. So we automate all those transitions. Basically, anything that happens in our version control system, in our code base, that's going to automatically move the tickets for us. It's really important. Why? Because Portfolio is reporting on the status of those tickets. Also, tickets can't be overloaded in a column. So it's really important that if you have a ticket that's sitting in code review, but it's already been code reviewed, you're taking up space for another ticket. So it's really important that these things reflect the true status of where they live. And so it also saves time because our developers aren't moving tickets or anything like that. They don't have to worry about it. They're just getting stuff done. Okay, and so here's an example of what happens when there's too many things in a column. The column goes bright red. This is a signifier to us that we need to hop on this issue right away. That means everybody, take a look at staging, get something up there, put on your QA hat, and help out with the testing. It helps keeps things moving. It helps us make sure that we're not overloading the workload that's on the board. And it's a great way to signify that something's wrong because this is Chromecasted over everybody's heads. You get a bright red column like that, no good. And so you'll see here that the work in progress limits that are set are visible to everybody. So it's no secret about why that column went red. And the work in progress limits that I mentioned before are super important to Kanban, almost just as important as sprints are the crux of Scrum. Work in progress could be considered like the crux of Kanban. And so it helps us with a few things. One, focus. So as human beings, we can only really focus on a few things at once, and limiting that work in progress will also limit the number of distractions that we come across and ensure that we are always dealing with a manageable amount of work at any given time. And baking in quality is essential to the Kanban methodology. And then it also helps us identify bottlenecks. So if a column is constantly going red, that lets us know that the team that's responsible for that status or for that column, they can't keep up with the pace of work as it comes in. So we can remedy that in a few different ways. Maybe there's inefficiencies in that step. Maybe we need to add members to that team. Maybe the work in progress limit needs to be, we need to add to that. So it helps us ID bottlenecks. And then priority. So it's really important that we're delivering the value to our business in the order of priority. And we can be assured that if something's on the board, it made it there because at one point it was important enough to be at the top of the backlog. So it's really important that we get those things out in order. And then you didn't see a backlog on our board because we use this labs feature, the Kanban backlog, and some call it Kanplan or Kanplan or something. So it's a really useful feature. It keeps our to-do column nice and tidy. We don't have to deal with like 100 ticket long backlog sitting on our board, so it helps us out a lot. And so that's really how we use Kanban at Thrillist, and that works out for us. But now I'm going to show you what Portfolio does with all of that data and how it sort of takes all of our work and forecasts how long it's going to take us to deliver the value that we committed to as a business. And Portfolio, if you're not familiar with it, it gives you a Gantt chart-esque style schedule over here, and it basically has the delivery dates at the bottom, and it gives you an overview across teams as well, and you can configure this in any which way you want, filtering by team or theme, and we'll dive into all those things, but it's just a view that we never had before, and it's done wonders for us. And it's important that we have a planning framework behind all of this to make sure that we're staying on top of the progress that we're making. And so I just want to touch on that really quickly. And if you're familiar with enterprise service planning or David Anderson's teachings on Kanban, this is like basically right out of the textbook. There's basically all these different feedback loops that we use throughout our organization to find out how we're doing, making sure that we're always improving. And the cadences that are recommended up here, we do actually do these things weekly. So we've adjusted this to sort of keep up with our pulse, our drumbeat. And so just really quickly, I'm going to touch on each one of these. So our strategy review is basically our quarterly planning review. This is where we take a good look at the next 3.5 months out, plan what we're going to do. And then down here is our replenishment meeting, and that's a weekly meeting we have with our stakeholders, whether it be our edit staff or our analytics team or our SEO team, find out what they need from us. That could be small features that aren't worth tracking on a roadmap, or that could be bugs. It's something we need to get out right away. So we have a weekly replenishment meeting, and we also have a weekly service delivery review, which is a little bit higher level. That's basically how we're doing as a business. Are we meeting your needs? Are the things you've been asking for getting addressed? And any changes that need to be made on like the quarterly planning plan that we put in front of us. And then we have our operations review, which is basically an internal review, meaning it's myself, head of product, CTO, and we're taking a look at how we're doing things just from a tech and product perspective. Are the processes that we have in place the best way to do things? Are there things we can improve? What are we missing out on by not doing Scrum? Should we try it? And we have. So this is basically a review of making sure that the way we're doing things is working and we're not missing out on any improvements. And then our risk review, super important review that we'll dive into, where we throw the portfolio plan up on the wall and we all take a look at it and we make sure that we're tracking to the things that we committed to on a weekly basis, and we're flagging risks, dependencies, and things of that nature. And then down here, the Kanban meeting, that's just your daily stand-up. Everyone here, I'm sure, is very familiar with stand-up. And delivery planning meetings, things like handoffs or coordinating deploys if needed, just ad hoc meetings like that. And so if you think about it in sections, what's going on here is we're asking ourselves, are we doing the right thing? So in the next quarter, are these the most important things for our business? This week, are these the most important things for our business? This is really a prioritization conversation. And then over here, what we're asking ourselves are we doing things right? So is this the best way forward? Do we need to change a process? Do we need to get rid of one? And then down here, this is where our developers and our designers live, and they're just focused on getting things done. So as managers, we're putting a lot of effort in to make sure that our developers and our designers have what they need to do their jobs to the best of their ability, and they can focus on doing those things. So I want to talk about the strategy review because portfolio plays a pivotal role here. And what we're doing here is quarterly planning. So we're basically scoping out the next 3.5 months of our lives, compiling features, getting requests from all the different departments about what they want to see out of the product and tech teams. And then we're throwing estimates on those projects. And then once we do that, portfolio can generate a plan for us. And then we could throw some what-if scenarios in there. So we could play around with portfolio in like a sandbox environment where it won't affect JIRA software, it won't affect our boards. But it's really useful in doing hiring scenarios, shuffling priorities to see what will happen with certain dependencies. It's just a really powerful tool. So here's what it would look like when we're scoping something out for a quarter. So basically what we're doing here is we're breaking the things down that we've gathered from all the different departments into these high-level business initiatives, right? And a business initiative, it could take a couple of quarters to get done. And underneath that, we have our epics, and everyone is pretty familiar with epics if you're using JIRA software. And the way we're thinking about epics today is basically on a design, front-end, back-end sort of style. It's just the way that it works for us. And basically, it organizes this list of things that we know we have to do in this next quarter in a very natural way. Like, it just makes sense. So, and we can roll it up, and we can see how long those things will take after we do our estimation sessions. And we could also link things together really easily with portfolio. Basically, you can click on a story, epic, initiative, basically any level of a hierarchy, and make it dependent on something else. And it's really simple to do, and that also gets reflected in JIRA software once you make the commitment to that. It's great. So basically just listing out the scope for the quarter, and that could take a couple days, but once it's done, we bring in our designers and our developers, and we basically put in front of them what we want to accomplish in the next 3.5 months, and it gives them a great overview of what's coming down the pipe. It also gives us an opportunity to understand how long we think these things are going to take, and that's a little bit of a challenge, and we're always learning from the different ways that we do that. But today, we're thinking about that in sort of ideal days. So we use hours and days as our estimation, and what that really means is if nobody bugged you, if you didn't have to go to any meetings today and there weren't any distractions, how long would it take you to develop or design this feature? And we all know that's not a real thing, right? There's no such thing as an ideal day, but I'll show you how portfolio can also help us out with that. And a really good thing about the estimation in portfolio is that you can estimate based on a skill. So you could say that this particular task is going to need some UX skill, or you could say it's going to need a front-end development skill, and you can define the skills yourself. But what this does is it allows portfolio to suggest assignees for you. So if somebody has a skill of, say, front-end development, it could suggest that that person gets assigned this task, which is super useful. And then let's get back to the ideal days for a second, because what we're really dealing with here is some unknowns. And I'd like to read this quote from Donald Rumsfeld from 2002, because I think it's pretty, it has a lot to do with the way we plan, right? So it says, there are known knowns, right? There are things we know. There are known unknowns. That is to say, there are things we know we don't know. But there are also unknown unknowns. There are things we don't know we don't know. And some of you in the product management world might have heard this quote before, but I think it really rings true. I mean, we're doing a good job of identifying, things that we know, things like maybe we have to make an API endpoint. All right, we know that. Maybe there are things we know we don't know. Maybe we don't know what the payload of that API endpoint is going to be. And then there are unknown unknowns, things we're not conscious of in the present moment that are going to take our time. And the way we deal with that is with capacity. So the things we're planning on doing, we know that our designers, our developers, they're not going to be spending 40 hours a week doing what we're planned to do. Our designers, we allocate about 80% of their time to do things that we're tracking in portfolio. And that's worked out pretty well in the design team, but we have the same sort of setup with our developers. And through our service delivery reviews, we got some feedback where, we don't think we're getting enough attention on these things that are not in the roadmap, things like one-off bugs or small little features. And so we've actually taken that down to about 24 hours a week of development time against things that we're tracking in our roadmap. And Portfolio also allows you to set absences, so you can see there, like Ariel's going camping, and she's going to be out of the office that week. So, and you can visualize this on the plan as well. And then the what-if scenarios. So this is a great part of Portfolio. It'll generate a plan like this after you plug in your estimates, shows you how long things are going to take. And what you can do is you can mess around with the different priorities that you set. So if your business said, project A is the most important thing that we have to get done, you could play around with that. What if we made it the least important thing? What else could we fit in if we sacrificed the priority of project A? And we can also run hiring scenarios. So this is one we actually ran. We're going to upgrade our backend to Drupal 8, right? We run on Drupal, and we are overdue for an upgrade, and wow, this is going to take a long time to do. There's only 2 developers on our backend team who have the Drupal skill, so the other guy can't get this task assigned to him, and this is just going to take too long. We need to figure out how to get this down. Well, what if we brought in an outside contractor? He would work 40 hours a week. He wouldn't be a part of our team necessarily, but we'll bring him on for 3 months, and we'll see what that does to the plan, and we could throw his start and end dates in there, and there you go. So these sort of scenarios are really powerful when it comes to having a conversation with your management team because you have real data behind it. And you can also play around with the different skill sets of others and see, how much faster would we be able to get this done if so-and-so was, a Drupal expert? Should we get him some training on Drupal? And then once we feel good about this, we sit back, we take a look at the plan, we see where we're going to land with these different products and projects. And what we do at Thrillist is we basically change all of the dates for these releases to be fixed release dates. And what that means is Portfolio isn't going to adjust it for us day in and day out. It's not going to say, well, I think you're going to land 2 weeks out today, and then the next day, if some tickets didn't get closed, it'll say, all right, well, 2 weeks now from today is when you're going to deliver. No, we basically set in stone the day that we see here, and then that won't move. So then over time, we could see if we're going to miss that date or if Portfolio thinks we're going to hit that date, and it can even let you know if you're going to come in early. And it really just goes back to that gut feeling that I talked about in the beginning that some of you are stressing over right now. And Portfolio feels the same thing, but it doesn't BS you about it. It lets you know, and it turns things bright red. So once this plan gets approved, we stamp it. That's my stamp animation. And a great part about Portfolio is that we can now push the scope of our Portfolio plan to our boards and basically populate the backlog for our teams directly from Portfolio. So there's really no double entry going on here. It works great. And Portfolio can pull in all the details about that ticket. So it'll pull in the title, it'll pull in the estimation, it'll pull in the epic link, the assignee if you configure it to. And it just saves a ton of time. And so that's the way we do our strategy review. That's the way we do our quarterly planning. We build a portfolio plan based on the next 3.5 months of work and allocate different assignees to it based on their skill and based on the estimation. But then while we're going throughout the quarter and while people are working on different tasks and projects, things can change. And so we have to make sure that we're staying on top of the work that's going on, and that's what we do at our risk review. So every week we throw the portfolio plan up on the wall, and we're taking a look at the different fixed end dates, and the ones that are red for a reason. They're red because they're overloaded. Portfolio thinks we're not going to be able to hit that date. So we flag that risk. We also discuss new dependencies that come up. And then we also take action. So it's just one thing to say, oh, we're going to miss this date by a week for whatever reason, but it's another thing to say, well, if we shave the scope of this project, we can still hit that date, and then we'll roll out, feature XYZ, sometime after. So tracking is great because we can visualize our plan in any which way we want. So we can filter by team, we can filter by quarter. You can assign themes, basically like what we basically just use, like video or Google AMP, Facebook Instant. Like you could use it based on like a project, or I've seen people use it on different like initiatives, really. But that's what gives it all the color, which is easy to see how these tickets relate to each other across teams. And then you can look at it by member, so you can identify when someone's going to be out of the office. And if you want to know why our visual design guide's going to take so long, well, our designer who's working on it's getting married. Should we, move that because he has a 2-week honeymoon coming up? It's those kind of conversations. And then flagging risks. So if we look here, you can see that these releases here are red. We could dive into these releases. You can see that this video nodes project is going to miss by about a week, and we can dive in and play around with the different views and find out why. Well, if the UX is pushing out the back end, let's have a conversation with the UX team. What are they working on? Were our estimates just inaccurate? Are there things coming up on that team that we're not aware of that we need to take care of? And taking action as well. So here is an example of something where priority is shifting on us, right? So if someone says, this cleanup ads project is now the most important thing to us, even though we told you at the beginning of the quarter that it wasn't, well, there's no longer the whole just shove it in and get it done sort of thing. It's more of a conversation. It's a discussion about what we need to sacrifice in place of making this thing the most important project. So if we say, all right, well, it's the most important thing in portfolio in our sandbox environment, we can analyze all the downstream effects that would have. And if we go to our stakeholders and say, look, we can get this done for you by October 7th, but all these other projects over here, these are going to be sacrificed, that's real data behind that. That's not a gut feeling. That's not an I think. That's data telling us that. So it's something we should really take seriously. And if we were to commit to that, our backlog would get populated with that ticket at the very top. It now lets the team know this is the most important thing to the business, and you can always feel confident that you're pulling the most important things off the top. And so that's portfolio for us. And I want to wrap up here with a couple of things. So we talked about these planning problems, right? Unknowns. We're dealing with this by estimating an ideal days, and then compensating with that with capacity. You could also look at historical projects if you'd like to see if you want to size compare them, and that's how you can get your estimates for things that maybe you don't have the full scope or the full understanding of yet. Developers are pretty good about saying this is about the same size as this other project, so I'm going to need about 10 ideal days for this, and that works just fine. Dependencies, so we saw that visually, portfolio makes it super simple to understand the schedules of other teams, and also which tasks are dependent on those teams. So it's no longer a black box that you're dependent on another team to get it done by a certain time, and everyone's aware of that. Availabilities, so we can plug in vacation time, we can plug in capacity. It's a real powerful tool. And then the reporting is real time. Ticket gets closed or someone logs time to a ticket, that's reflected right away in portfolio. You're no longer running around to the different managers trying to get a status update. Everything's happening in real time in JIRA, rolling up into your portfolio plan. So that's really our mix. If you weren't aware of portfolio before and what it can do, I really suggest that you take a look at the portfolio booth at some point during Summit. It's super easy, as you saw in the keynote, to set up a plan. It takes 5 steps, they said. And if you're a Kanban team that's not comfortable with estimating in time, Reese from the portfolio team wrote a blog post recently on how to get around that. Basically, a very traditional Kanban team that doesn't estimate their tickets can also use portfolio in a really valuable way. And if you're a Scrum team as well, portfolio does a really good job of showing you the sprints that are upcoming and plugs in your velocity to make sure you're not overloading any particular sprint. So I really hope that this talk gave you the inspiration to give JIRA Portfolio a shot. There's a Portfolio Pioneers LinkedIn group where we discuss upcoming features and things like that. I'd check that out as well. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me. Really appreciate it. So now if there's any questions, we can go ahead and do that.
Okay, we do have time for questions, so I'm just going to start reading from the top of the app. What type of tool is used to automate the actual workflow? Or is it based off of basic validation states in the JIRA workflow set up there?
There we go. Okay, great. What's actually going on there, we started off using this connector that's in JIRA software. It's like called the DVCS connection, Distributed Version Control System Management thing. I don't know. You can find it in the application settings. What we did is we actually wrote our own program after that to do that, just like a little Ruby app that sits in Heroku and listens for transition statuses and things of that nature. We did that just because there's certain things that go on in our version control system that didn't already exist in the connector, and it was faster. So it's a custom Ruby application, and if you have any questions on it, I'd be happy to talk to you about it.
Does it matter to you that Portfolio only provides a forward-looking view? There's no historical view of the progress.
Yeah, it definitely does. This is probably my number one pain point with it. If the question was, how do you get around that, what we've been doing was in 1.0, we were exporting everything and then uploading it to Domo, which is a reporting platform that we use. We were doing that for a long time, but that just felt wrong because it was like a manual process, and Portfolio is all about automating your reporting. So it is something that I'd like to see, and I did hear from some folks that later on you'll be able to take some sort of snapshot in time of Portfolio and refer to it, but I'm not putting words in anybody's mouth about that.
Okay, feedback noted. How large are you scaling this? How many developers, QA, et cetera, are working in products in your portfolio? That's
a great question. So we're a relatively small team. By that I mean there's about 30 of us, including design and QA and development. So it's a relatively small team. I think that's one of the reasons why Scrum didn't really work out for us, because there was so much overhead and all the planning and the retrospectives, and what we figured out was that the things we set out to do in that sprint weren't the things that we actually did. So we were doing all this planning for really what felt like no reason. But I could see as we scale maybe putting a little bit more structure around it.
Under people, should we only track developers, as in dev, QA, or also Scrum Master, PO, UX, et cetera?
So that's a good question. So I used to track QA in there, but then we sort of ended up baking that into our development estimates. Reason for tracking the QA was basically to make sure that we had enough staff to test multiple products at once if they were both ready for QA. But I don't think there's any value, at least on our team, for tracking PM's time and QA's time. It's really just baking all that stuff in to the original development estimate. So we're really just concerned about how long it's going to take to design something and how long it's going to take to build and test that, with the testing baked in to the building.
How do you define or manage your work in progress limits? And then the follow-up question is, will a limit change based on the number of devs?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's different ways of doing that, of coming up with a number. There's a book, Agile Management with Kanban, written by a guy named Eric Breckner from the Xbox team from Microsoft, and that comes with a spreadsheet, and you plug in the number of people on your team and different inputs, and it spits out the work in progress numbers for you, which is really awesome. For us, really, it was more changing it based on those improvement conversations that we've had, and basically taking a look at the columns that kept going red and deciding what to do there. I'd say start with that spreadsheet from Eric Breckerman's, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, his book, and then go from there.
Do you have a practical example of when you use release streams versus releases?
Yeah, well, streams were available in 1.0, but are no longer available in 2.0, and we did used to use streams. The way we use releases is basically anything that we want to track a date for. So like if we know we're going to put out a maps feature on Friday and we want to track that on the roadmap, we'll make that a release. If we have a bucket of features that are going to come afterwards and you want to call that a 1.1 release, then we'll track that as well. Basically anything in portfolio that you want to see on the schedule as a point in time, make a release for it.
How can you project known velocity changes for future sprints in the plan? For example, holidays, vacations, etc.
How do you, okay, so velocities with like unknown or known days off and stuff like that. I mean, that sort of thing, like Reese's blog post for Kanban teams, what he's doing is basically taking the number of tickets you can get done in a week and calling that your velocity, which works out really, really well. So if you can get, like, say, 20 tickets done in a week as a team, right? Kanban, the portfolio will show you in a column for each week, like, who should have which ticket and basically which tickets are going to be able to get done in that week. And if somebody's on vacation, it actually takes that into account. So if you had, say, 5 developers on a team, 20 tickets a week, that's 4 tickets a person, and someone who's out for half the week might only get 2 tickets assigned to them.
Okay. Let me see. Sorry, some of these are repeat questions. If you have CI and CD, how do you properly evaluate when a bug was introduced? How do you cut the noise of bugs from new releases?
That's a good question. I mean, I can't really speak on behalf of the dev team for like doing Git blames and things like that to figure out how it was introduced, but if the question is more along the lines of like, did we break it with this release, or if this bug has been living in production for a while, I don't know the technicalities of how my developers figure that stuff out, but if the bug is big enough to warrant that question, we'll conduct an investigation on that. But for the most part, when a bug's found in production, you could really put the onus on everybody, product managers included. And that's really everybody's responsibility to fix it and get it done. So we're more worried about getting that prioritized in the backlog and out, unless it's something that we should really take a good hard look at.
Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions. So the first is, do you swim lane by epic or query, and why?
On the Kanban board, no, we're not swim laning by epic. We have those epic labels up there just so you can, at a glance, understand like what project that ticket's a part of. Reason being, I mean, it's just nicer, I guess. Like, I don't like having the whole swim lane thing. We use a swim lane for expedition, so if you're going to expedite a ticket, like if there's like a real big bug that needs to go out right now, it's at the very top, and it's front and center for everybody to see at the top of the board. And you know, we're Chromecasting on TVs, so we don't want to be having these huge breakages on our board. We want to be able to fit everything in there.
Okay, and last question. If transitions are automated, how are limits enforced?
Yeah.
Can JIRA prevent Bitbucket from opening a pull request?
Okay, so it's a good question, right? Really traditionally, like what I would love to have is the ability to split a column in 2, and then, you know, if something goes into the code review column and it's not actively being code reviewed, have it in like the left-hand side of that split. You know, it's something that our automated workflows will throw things into a column regardless of the work in progress limit. And you know, we're still trying to figure out the best way forward for that. But for now, it's worked out pretty well. It sort of lights a fire under everybody's butt to get stuff out without, you know, skipping over the done rules like code reviews and quality assurance.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike.
All right. Thank you.